Hello and welcome back to our video tutorials on EDIUS Pro. In this lesson we're going to take a look at how you can change a few settings within EDIUS that will help you set up an editing environment that is easy and efficient to work with, and how you can change a few settings to make EDIUS emulate a variety of other video editing software programs. This makes it very easy for editors who are used to working with other software to sit down, change a few settings, and create an interface environment with which they are very familiar. The slight drawback to this flexibility is that when we try and do training long distance, such as these tutorials on ediustips.com, if your settings are not like my settings, then the things that I show you on my computer may not necessarily work the same on yours. And unfortunately, some of these crucial settings that make significant changes to the way that EDIUS functions can be changed inadvertently by accidentally hitting a keyboard shortcut. So to make sure that we at least start out on the same page, I would like you to take a few minutes and make your settings match mine. Now the place that we will do that is from up in our menu bar. Go to Settings, Application Settings. And the first time that you open this box, it might look something more like this. And you may think that these are the only options available under changing application settings. However, if you expand open the little plus sign here, you'll see that there are a number of levels to this application settings dialog box. Let's go through these settings and take note of some of the more crucial settings that make such significant changes to the way EDIUS operates. Let's first of all take a look at the timeline settings. This first line, extend clips when applying transition crossfade. I like to keep this box checked. And don't worry too much about the wording here. I think that the wording is a little bit misleading here when it says extend clips. And you might actually find this problem in more than one place in EDIUS. It might be of interest to mention that EDIUS is a program that was born in Japan and now lives in France. So if some of the terminology here and in some of the help manuals leaves you scratching your head at times, it could be that some of the things have gotten lost in translation. That's why we're here to help you sort it all out. Even though it says extend clips while applying a transition crossfade, having this box checked means that the duration of your clips will not change when you apply a transition. It is actually when you have this box unchecked that the duration of your clip will actually change when you apply or delete a transition. And we almost never want that. So keep this box checked. I think what the programmers of EDIUS meant to say here was that when you have this box checked, you will extend the two clips into each other without changing the duration. Let's go with that. Now insert default crossfade in transition. Take note of where this setting is, because you may want to come back to this and change this depending on what you're doing. I like to keep this box checked for most of my editing tasks. I do a lot of dissolves in my video projects, and when I place a dissolve on the video track, I like to have it at the same time appear on the audio track. I don't want to have to go and make a separate video dissolve and then go down to the audio track and also apply an audio crossfade. I want to do it all in one action. However, there are a few times when I do like to have this unchecked. For example, if I'm editing a number of different interviews that I've done together, let's say this girl and her mother are talking, and her mother says something nice just right after the girl, and we want to compliment what the girl says and reinforce it by what the mother says. The way I've shot this is I've had the girl on one side and the mother on the other. So it makes for a very nice dissolve when you're doing the placement on the program. However, I do not want to dissolve the audio, and so if I'm doing a number of these interviews at the same time, I might want to go back to Application Settings and uncheck this, hit Apply, and now when we do a dissolve on the video track, we do not get the dissolve down on the audio track. But for the most part, we'll leave that checked. Now, the next few boxes you can keep unchecked. Let's take particular note of this one here, Add Clips to Mapped Track. Now, if you are an avid editor making the transition to EDIUS, you will probably feel more comfortable in an environment where this box is checked. Because when this box is checked, EDIUS will insist on having you go and map each track that you want to make a placement. For example, if we want this lady to show up on video 2, well, it's just not going to happen unless I go in and map video 2 to receive that clip. If I want her audio to appear down in channel 2, I have to go and map that. So having the box Add Clips to Mapped Track means that you are forcing yourself into a very restrictive type of editing where you must physically go and change your tracks every time you want to place on a different track. If you are coming more from a freestyle editing type like Adobe Premiere, you'll notice if we have this unchecked, let's go ahead and add another video track here just to be able to demonstrate this a little better. Go ahead and add one video track. So now we have 3 tracks. You'll notice now that if we have the V1 track mapped and the A1 track mapped, you'll notice now that when we bring our clips in, we find our good in point here, and here's our out point. When we bring these in and want to drop them in on the V1 track and V2 tracks, that they will go there. However, in our style of freeform editing, if we want to place the video track on V2, we notice that the audio now automatically goes to A2. And should we place the video on track 3, we notice that the audio slips down to track 3. Now you can override this even with this setting unchecked by simply going and mapping a particular audio track that you want your clip to go to. Now notice when we place the clip down on V1 that the audio is going to the mapped track 3A that we have set up here. So you can override that setting, but it's nice to know that EDIUS can be set up to emulate Adobe Premiere Pro and maybe some other programs that use that free form style that automatically moves your audio down to different tracks depending on where you place it on the video track. Okay, let's go back to Application Settings. And let's notice a few more things here on the timeline window just before we move on. Snap of event. Having these boxes selected affects how things snap together in EDIUS. And what this refers to is how different elements such as clips, cursor, rubber band, markers, etc. will be attracted to, or shall we say, find an easy resting point on important sections of your timeline. I find it helpful to leave all of these on. Clip timecode. You can leave all of these checked. Up here under Default, these are your mode settings. These are the settings that make the most significant changes to the way the EDIUS timeline responds to your action of placing clips. We will devote a whole lesson on modes, what they do, and when you might want to have these various modes turned on or off. For now, let's set the default settings to have the sync and ripple mode unchecked and have the overwrite mode selected. Now, if during your edit session you should find that there are times when it would be more helpful to be in the insert mode or to have the sync or ripple mode on, you can always make these changes from the timeline itself. And you'll notice here on the timeline icon setting, you can toggle back and forth between having the insert or overwrite mode on and the ripple mode on or off and the sync mode on or off. Okay, but as we start out our settings and as we work with most of our tutorials here at EDIUStips.com, we will have the sync and ripple mode off, and we will, for the most part, be in the overwrite mode as we work with these tutorials. Now, the waveform setting gives you two options as to how your waveform will appear, your audio waveform in EDIUS. And you'll see that there's quite a difference in the way that audio is represented based on what setting you choose here. I like to have the log setting checked, and you'll see that you can visualize your audio a lot better with that. Now, this last setting is clip thumbnail. EDIUS gives you the option of having a small thumbnail of your clip appear at the end of the clip as well as at the beginning of the clip. Or, if you prefer, you can have that set off so that no representation of your clip appears on the video tracks. However, I think that you will find it helpful to have that selected. So let's go ahead and mark those back again. If you're a very visual person and you like to see these little thumbnails a little better, you can expand your video track. Go ahead over to this left-hand column and grab the section right in between your two video tracks. Press your left mouse button down and drag this down to open up your video track. And now you'll see a much bigger representation of your video track on your timeline. Now, this is probably expanded out too big, especially if you're working with one monitor. So let's bring that down a little bit and maybe bring another clip in. And now you can very easily visualize right from the timeline itself your edit to make it just a little bit easier. Okay, well, let's move on with our application settings and see what else we have here. Let's go on down to render. This box allows you to set what EDIUS will render when you choose to render your project. These portions will be denoted by a small orange bar at the top of your timeline, and what you decide to have checked here will depend somewhat on the speed of your processors. If you find that your computer has absolutely no problem playing back through your timeline with transitions or filters in place, then you could probably uncheck these, but by default EDIUS has all of these checked, and let's go ahead and leave that for now. Let's go on to duration. Now, here is where you can set the default length of what still images and graphics will be when they are placed on your video track. I believe by default EDIUS comes with 1 second as the default. So as we grab a graphic down onto the timeline, it will automatically by default only be 1 second in length. Now, of course, once it's on the timeline, you can go ahead and grab either end of that graphic and drag it out to make it longer than the 1 second. However, if you have your timeline contracted like this, and you were to bring in a 1 second graphic, it will appear on your timeline so small that you can't go ahead and grab it and extend it out, and you'll have to go ahead and extend your timeline out before you can actually make it longer. So I usually like to set mine at 5 seconds. And now, when I add a graphic or a title to the timeline, it automatically gives me 5 seconds of material to work with. Now, under Source, you can choose whether or not you want to adjust the frame rate when importing clips. Let's leave that unchecked, and also, in fact, we can just leave everything here as it comes by default. Deck settings. Now, the way that I capture video from my deck, I like to have it checked here for confirm real number, so that when I insert a tape, EDIUS will ask me to insert a name for the tape that I've put in. This helps me to remember to name my tapes. A very good new feature in the latest version of EDIUS. And also, I like to have this checked, confirm file name, and we'll set it to before capture. And this way, EDIUS will ask you to, before you start capturing, give a name to your files that will be automatically incremented. And I like to have a unique file name for each of the tapes that I capture that are related to the tape itself, so that if projects should ever go offline, that having a file name that actually references the name of the tape itself will help you rebuild your project. Now down here under automatically divide files, I like to have EDIUS automatically divide my files when capturing. I go ahead when I capture tapes, I just capture the whole tape. But I want EDIUS to divide my files each time the camera was paused. And so whenever there's a time code break, or when the aspect ratio changes, or when the audio sampling rate changes, or when the recorded time and date changes, if you have all of these checked, EDIUS will be sure to break up your tape at all of those points where you paused the camera or made adjustments to your camera. And this way, after you have captured a whole tape, you will have probably 100 different files rather than just one big long one. Restore offline clip. You can leave this as is. Playback. Now for the way that I edit, I don't want EDIUS to stop if it should encounter a dropped frame, so I leave that unchecked. And I kind of like to have EDIUS continue playing while I'm editing. Oftentimes when I'm reviewing a project and I've pressed play, I see something that I can change or adjust very quickly, and I can go ahead and make that adjustment while the timeline continues to play, and that makes editing a project just that much faster. If I really want to stop the playback, I'll just hit the space bar. And same goes for the next. We can check that. Okay, match frame. All of these default settings are fine. Let's go into application. Now I like to set these more to like 10 for the recent number of clips and also for recent projects. You might have noticed that when you start EDIUS, you are presented with the last 5 projects that you have worked on, and you can select that from the opening dialog box. However, you can set this to 10, and this allows you to see more projects that you have worked on in recent days, and I find that to be helpful. Now under settings, if you would like to change the interval in which EDIUS automatically backs up your program, here's where you can do that. By default, EDIUS is set to back up your project every 3 minutes, and if you're working on a short project, you can probably just go ahead and leave it at every 3 minutes. You hardly even notice that it's happening. It happens so fast in the background. Now, if you're working on a very extensive project with lots of media being referenced by the project and the backup process takes 15 seconds or so, you may not want to have your edit session interrupted every 3 minutes with a 15-second backup. So in that case, you might want to change this to, say, every 10 or 15 minutes. And that way your session won't be interrupted so often, and you would ever only lose about 15 minutes of work should you have a power system failure. Now under default titler, if your version of EDIUS came with a third-party titler, or you have purchased a third-party titler that works with EDIUS, and you have that installed, here is where you could select that. If you have not installed a third-party titler, it will not show up here, and your only option will be Quick Titler. And down here under Project File, here's where you can change where EDIUS will save its projects to by default each time you start a new project. So if you are no longer happy with the hard drive that you chose at the beginning when you first started working with EDIUS and you want to change that, here's where you can do that. Okay, now under Customize, our first option for settings is Button, and here is where you can add or subtract icons or buttons from your various windows. Now to give you an idea of what this does, let's go ahead and add a new icon to our timeline window, and you can select the timeline window by going up and selecting this first bar and look down for timeline. And now as we look down here, we'll see a variety of different icons that can become available on your timeline window at the very top here. And there's one that I like to have on my timeline that does not appear by default when you start EDIUS for the first time, and that is Create a Still Image. And so let's add that to our timeline. Just select Create a Still Image icon and move it over by choosing the arrow button here. Now when we apply that, you'll see that the Add a Still Image icon option is now on our timeline. And you can do this for all of your windows. For example, in the bin window, if you wanted to add or subtract some of the icons that are available in your bin window, you can simply switch this over to bin and add and subtract your icons that are available in the bin window. Okay, let's go on to control. And actually the default settings are fine here. Now under overlay, here is where we can adjust what will appear in the overlay of our record and play monitors. Maybe the first time that you started EDIUS, you noticed some time code showing up in your display monitors. And if you're like me, you probably found that distracting and wondered, how can we get rid of that? Well, there's ways you can do that from the menu, but you can also do it here in Application Settings. So go ahead and select some of these buttons and notice how the overlay display appears in our play and record monitors. Now, if you're creating your titles with QuickTitler, and you want to make sure that your titles and graphics are in a video safe frame, you might want to have that on at some point. But to have it here by default is probably not the best way to display this, because you probably wouldn't want to have this showing for most of the time. So I would recommend going ahead and having that shut off. And if you ever need to have that display, you can always go under View, Overlay, and choose here the various types of overlay settings that you would like to have. Okay, display bin details. Now these are easy enough to change over from the bin itself, so we won't worry about these now. Keyboard shortcuts, we'll have a separate tutorial on how we can change your keyboard shortcuts, so let's move on. Now, if you're not comfortable with the way EDIUS looks by default, here's where you can go in and change the way EDIUS looks, the interface. And so if you prefer a nice green look, you can notice the color as it changes here as you move the slider bars. If you like that nice green, go ahead and select that, hit apply. And now you notice that your whole interface is a nice, beautiful green color. And if you're not happy